Our scripture reading today is found in Deuteronomy chapter 16, verses 11 through 15. And rejoice before the Lord at the place he will choose as a dwelling for his name. You, your sons and daughters, your male and female servants, the Levites in your towns, and the foreigners, the fatherless and the widows living among you. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and follow carefully these decrees. Celebrate the festival of tabernacles for 7 days after you have gathered the produce of your threshing floor and your winepress. Be joyful at your festival, you, your sons and daughters, your male and female servants, and the Levites, the foreigners, the fatherless, and the widows who live in your towns. For 7 days celebrate the festival to the Lord your God at the place the Lord will choose. For the Lord your God will bless you in all your harvest and in all the work of your hands, and your joy will be complete. This is the word of the Lord. Please be seated.
Amen. Thank you. All right. Thanks, Miles. Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Hope Church. My name is Drew. I'm one of the pastors here. What a delight it is to be here with you on this beautiful fall day. I know with so much swirling around the world, it really is a gift to just be in a space where perhaps we can get our minds and thoughts off of ourselves and perhaps off of what's happening in the world and perhaps get a different perspective. You know, we have been in this sermon series and we've been calling it Counterformed. Can I hear you say Counterformed? That's right, and one of the reasons why we've been talking about this theme of being counterformed is the reality is we're so shaped and formed, whether intentionally or not, we are shaped by so many different voices and messages and images around the world, and we can easily get swept up in the tide of all sorts of news cycles and current events. And what does it look like for us, though, to actually be in a space, and what it means to actually be a follower of Jesus is to be someone who's instead of being shaped by all these other voices, to be shaped by a God of love, compassion, forgiveness, kindness, and justice. And we've been talking about these different themes of how can we as a people, especially here in a city like this, where there is exponentially more noise around us, how can we as a people be shaped into the image of Jesus? And so today we're actually looking at a passage, and we're going to talk about a theme that God actually introduces to the people of ancient Israel. And it's this theme of being celebratory. Now, some of you might be listening to that, you might be like, celebratory, okay, like, well, I don't think we need to work on that. Well, just to give you a sense of kind of this theme of celebration, and why is this such an important part and a fabric of what it means to be a follower of Jesus, especially in how we go about our day-to-day lives. So I want to give you actually some context as to what's happening in the passage in the book of Deuteronomy, which the people of God, they've been liberated from slavery, and God is trying to form this new identity amongst his people in the way they're supposed to go about life and the way they're supposed to go about following God or Yahweh, even in whatever circumstances that they might find themselves in. Now, you may or may not know the background of especially ancient Israel, that today, even present-day Jews actually celebrate some of the festivals that are talked about in the passage in Deuteronomy 16, in the passage that was just read for us. So, check this out. Here are 3 major pilgrimage feasts in Israel that's actually outlined in Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 16. Now, we're actually entering into this season in the Jewish calendar for the high holy days. And so, but what are some of the actually like the marker, the pivotal tall pole kind of events and gatherings within the Jewish tradition that for centuries have marked the way that Jews would actually live and respond to God? Now, these are 3 of them, and you've probably heard of some of these before. Whether you have a religious background or not, probably just by being here in New York City, you've heard about some of these different kind of celebrations. First, there's Passover and unleavened bread, which happens during the spring. And Passover is this celebration where not only is it a marker within the spring season, but also it's a celebration of God's deliverance. If you know anything about the story of the people of Israel who'd been enslaved in Egypt, Passover signals this celebration of God redeeming his people. Secondly, 50 days after Passover, there's actually another celebration called the Feast of Weeks, or it's called Pentecost. Now, Pentecost happens in early summer, and that too is a celebration, and all of these different celebrations actually follow an agricultural celebration as well. But it's a celebration of provision and God's giving of the covenant. So in other words, it would be a time when the Jews would actually celebrate that God was again demarcating how would the people of Israel be a unique people over and against the different people in the ancient Near Eastern world. And so the receiving of this covenant from God is something that's celebrated. Now, in the passage that was read for us, it's actually a passage that's talking about a festival that's called the Festival of Tabernacles or the Festival of Booths, otherwise known as Sukkot. And this happens in autumn, which is the season that we're in right now. And that's actually a festival where we remember, the people of Israel remember in joy and remembrance the way that God was with his people as they wandered through the wilderness and as they would set up tents before they entered into the promised land. So this idea then of setting up tents, that's why it's called the Feast of Tabernacles or Feast of Tents. It's a way for them to remember God's deliverance and provision in the midst of a very pivotal, difficult season of their lives. Now, check out the words that's used in the passage that was just read for us. Look at what it says. It says in Deuteronomy chapter 16, it says, "And rejoice." Can I hear you say rejoice? That's right. "Rejoice before the Lord your God at the place he will choose as a dwelling place for his name. You, your sons and daughters, your male and female servants, the Levites in your towns and the foreigners, the fatherless and the widows living among you. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt." Now, again, this constant refrain of remembering is constantly given to the people of ancient Israel, and especially this season of slavery. Why? Because slavery was something that had marked this oppressed people for hundreds of years. So for 400 plus years, the people had been enslaved in Egypt. And in many ways, these festivals and these moments of celebration are a time to remember, listen, this is the plight that you were in one day. That at some point, you and your family, and for generations, you were enslaved. And look at what it says. "And follow carefully these decrees. Celebrate the Festival of Tabernacles for 7 days after you have gathered the produce of your threshing floor and your winepress." In other words, the final harvest of the year. After you've done this, I want you to spend 7 days. Now, can you imagine being commanded? Like, this is a festival that's going to last for 7 days. It's a 7-day party. I was recently talking to someone, high-achieving New Yorker, ambitious, like many of you all, and they were telling me that they had a 5-day kind of vacation. And they told me that they can't remember the last time that for 5 straight days they were kind of trying to unplug from work and trying to celebrate or go on vacation. I was going to ask the question, how many of you, when was the last time you went on a 7, but I won't ask that, because I take it that many of us, it's the same. Like, actually having the discipline to go on vacations and to have a celebration of some sort. But could you imagine what God is doing as part of the annual calendar and rhythm of a people that had been enslaved? He's like, listen, this is what I want you to do. For 7 days, I want you to throw a massive party. And it's going to be a time where I'm commanding you to celebrate. Now, notice what happens. He says, "Be joyful at your festival. You, your sons and daughters, your male and female servants, and the Levites, the foreigners, the fatherless, and the widows who live in your towns. For 7 days, I want you to celebrate." High five your neighbor and say, "Celebrate." Can you do that real quick? That's right, the festival to the Lord your God, to the place the Lord will choose. For the Lord your God will bless you in all your harvest and in all the work of your hands, and your joy will be complete. Now, do you notice what's happening here? God, what he's doing is as he's demarcating what are our people going to be marked by, the people of Israel who have been enslaved for more than 400 years. What's going to be the rhythm of their lives, and what are going to be those moments throughout a year where it's actually not only an invitation, but it's a command to celebrate and to rejoice. And he's giving these instructions, especially around this one festival, about celebrating for 7 days. Now, why would God do that? Why would God do that for his people? Now, again, if you could imagine, especially for the people of Israel who had been enslaved for 400 years, could you imagine what that does to one's psyche? This constant battle for generations. I mean, just think about the history of the Constitution of the United States. Like 400 years is longer than that. Like, just imagine just a people that had been enslaved. But not only that, even if you were to look at the history of Israel, not only since the time that they were enslaved in Egypt, but even thereafter. And again, you don't even have to have a religious background. You probably have heard stories of the people of Israel being this small nation that would be exploited, that would be exiled, that would be conquered. Throughout the history of Israel, there's constant stories of the pain and the suffering that the Jewish people would have to go through. Now, that history has continued even to today's present day. Now, I recognize with all the conflict that happens in the Middle East, there are all sorts of complexities and a number of people who are suffering, Israel and beyond, and the people of Gaza. But could you imagine the people of God, they're used to being a people who are consistently suffering. Now, my father, my parents were immigrants from South Korea. They came to the United States in the mid-'70s, and I was born in Los Angeles. And my dad, he actually switched his career when he turned 40 years old, and he actually went into vocational ministry after working in air conditioning and refrigeration. And my dad, one of the things that really interested him about not only kind of this pursuit of vocational ministry, but it was also really the history of the Jewish people. And my dad, so we grew up kind of like in middle school when my dad made this switch in his career, like he would end up taking us to these various different gatherings of Jewish people on Shabbat, for instance. Now, a lot of these Jewish communities weren't used to seeing Gentiles or Korean Americans, especially Korean American middle schoolers, like walk in and observing what's happening. But my dad was such a persistent person. And so my father, one of the things that he would tell me and tell us, my brothers and I, about one of the things that interested him so fully was he actually believed, and I can kind of see where he was coming from. He actually believed that there were a lot of parallels between South Korea and the Korean people and the Korean Peninsula to the people of Israel. And so he would liken so many of these stories, and he would actually relate the story of the people of Israel to the story of Koreans. And he would talk about how South Korea was a small little country, and the divided peninsula and the history of conquest from these larger kind of countries and nation states around them. So he would tell us this history. Now, here's what's interesting about Korean history. In Korean history, there's actually this word that a lot of people talk about that encapsulates the psyche of the Korean people. It's this word called Han. And Han is this word of just this kind of unresolved grief and sadness and sorrow. And the reason why people and historians will talk about how this word Han is so central to the Korean experience is because, again, throughout the history of Korea, there's been these moments of such inexplicable pain, conquest, Japanese occupation, the Korean War, the divided peninsula, and even today, there's like this anguish that marks the Korean people. Now, perhaps this is the first time you're hearing this because you're just like, listen, K-pop Demon Hunter was pretty joyful. But actually throughout the history, and here's what's interesting, there's actually this traditional Korean folk instrument called the kayagum. And the kayagum is actually this instrument that's been calibrated to actually play kind of unique Korean music. And if you ever hear the kayagum though, it has this like, the sounds that the kayagum when it's played, like you pick at some of the strings and the strings have this very kind of almost discordant sound. So it sounds like this, it goes, dun, dun, dun. Like that's what it sounds like. Sorry, some of you who are into music, you're probably like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And maybe I shouldn't use this illustration anymore. But what I remember someone likened, they said the sounds of the kayagum, the reason why it sounds that way is because in Korean folk music, it actually kind of illustrates the Han of the Korean people, this longing, this long suffering. And so when you play the instrument actually sounds like wailing, like someone who's crying out. Can't even sing with like a clear intonation. Instead, it's marked by this kind of weepy, wailing kind of message. Now, Koreans have come a long way with K-pop. But this unspeakable kind of suffering that my father would talk about, and he would liken it to the Jewish people. In fact, my dad even went so far as he said, you know what? He said, I came across something that was so incredible. He said, you know, Jewish people are called the chosen people. Koreans come from the Chosun dynasty. I think Jewish people got it from Korean. No, I'm just kidding. But my dad would make all of these little parallels. Now, part of this whole background, now what am I talking about here? It's just, There's something so unique for a people that have historically been oppressed and marginalized in various different ways. And for myself, even coming from a Korean American background and kind of growing up with this very melancholy spirit about things, and seeing how when God is actually liberating the people of Israel into something new, a different way of life, he liberates them, and part of the discipline that he wants to give to the people who have only known suffering and difficulty and pain for the most part in terms of the larger story in which they've lived. Here he is giving this commandment to celebrate, to be joyful. And here's what it reveals. It reveals that celebration, it's a discipline. Especially if perhaps I've come from a background that has grown weary or cynical or has known the pain of suffering so frequently in my life. It's like when God's giving these festivals, he's saying, listen, I want these festivals to be times of remembrance of the pain, but actually a time of celebration of the ways in which God has delivered you and is taking you somewhere. And that's why it's a command, and that's why it's a discipline to rejoice and to have joy. Now, here's the thing. Some of you are probably like, all of us, I actually already have a lot of things to celebrate, and I don't really have a problem with that. Here we are. We live in the wealthiest nation in the world with some of the best of modern comforts in the world. Like, Drew, you don't have to talk to us about celebration. Well, you know what's interesting? I came across this article, February of 2025, earlier this year, and here's what the headline of this article said in the New York Times. It says the U.S. economy is racing ahead by leaps and bounds. Again, this is back in February. Almost everything else is falling behind. Now, here's a quote that actually comes from this article. Check out what it says. It says, "We are so wealthy, but so unhappy," said Bradley Berzer, a historian at Hillsdale College, a Christian school in Michigan. "It seems like the central question of modernity," Heidi Sherholtz, president of the Economic Policy Institute, a left-leaning think tank in Washington, put this way. "We are the richest country in the world, but we chronically fail to offer broad-based economic prosperity and security." Now, what does this mean? Economic growth in the U.S. has been remarkable, at least compared with growth in other high-income countries. In 1990, per capita gross domestic product in the U.S., the total value of the country's output divided by the number of residents was only 28% higher than in the Euro area. The gap is now more than 80%. So in other words, we've just, by leaps and bounds, actually progressed economically. But notice what this article observes. Yet comparisons in most other realms make the U.S. look much worse. This country has the lowest life expectancy of any rich country, which was not true for most of the 20th century. The U.S. has the highest murder rate of any rich country and the world's highest rate of fatal drug overdoses. It also has one of the lowest rates of trust in the federal government and among the highest rates of youth depression and single-parent families. When Americans are asked how satisfied they are with their own lives, the U.S. ranks lower than it did 3 decades ago, especially when in comparison to all these other nations that perhaps have also not progressed as economically as much as the U.S. It's not only those who have known suffering and have lived in oppression all their lives who need this discipline. It's also the wealthy and the people who are all trying to pursue happiness and joy in all these empty ways. And perhaps this nation is one of the greatest evidence of this, of where can we find a true and lasting joy. And the invitation is, the reason these festivals were given is because God wants us to cling to this value. Now, some of you might be wondering, like, what about sorrow and grief? Believe me, in the Jewish calendar, there's tons of opportunities for sorrow and grief. Yom Kippur is a day of atonement, a day of grieving and mourning. There are constantly these invitations to grieve as well as to rejoice. And what God is doing is God is actually setting up this rhythm as a discipline that sometimes perhaps we can get so lost in perhaps some of the worst parts of our lives or the things that harm us or the sad areas of life. And here God is saying, listen, celebration is a discipline. Now, I recognize there are two different camps of people. One camp of people are the people who you love when people sing happy birthday to you. You know, that's one camp. There's another camp. You don't love when people sing happy birthday to you. So I recognize like there's all sorts of spectrums of, again, this discipline of celebration. And yet the invitation of God is that this is a discipline. That what does it look like for us to actually be a people who, no matter what's happening in our lives, however our bank account is going, however things are flowing in our lives, what does it look like for us to be a people who can lean into celebration and to be disciplined in that pursuit? Now notice, it's not only that celebration is a discipline. This text actually gives us such a beautiful clue about kind of the effects of this kind of discipline of celebration. Check this out. It says, and rejoice before the Lord your God at the place he will choose as a dwelling for his name. And notice what it says. It says, you, your sons and daughters, your male and female servants, the Levites in your towns and the foreigners, the fatherless and the widows living among you. In other words, here God is, as he's giving this prescription of this discipline to celebrate in this festival. He's saying, listen, just open the gates. Be joyful at your festival. You, your sons and daughters, your male and female servants, the Levites, the foreigners, the fatherless, the widows who live in your everyone is welcome to the party. It's a discipline that actually has this multiplying effect. In other words, what happens when we actually cultivate this value of celebration, it actually begins to multiply and it actually begins to extend to others. And here, from the earliest markers of even as God is giving this commandment to the people of Israel about this, again, this reminder to celebrate as a discipline, he's also saying, like, don't you see, and this celebration should always be a blessing to all, including those who perhaps are suffering. Maybe it's the widow or the fatherless, the people who are going through a difficult time. I want you to be a signpost, a community that not only embraces this value of celebration, but also begins to extend it to others so that it multiplies. You know, it's so interesting because as I was just kind of meditating on this passage and I was thinking about just how God gives this invitation and this command really to celebrate to a people who had been constantly marginalized, oppressed, enslaved. And in the history of the United States, the people who have endured such profound suffering and difficulty, for certain has been the Black experience in the United States. The history of slavery, the history of oppression, the history of being treated less than. One of the authors that I love to read, who was deeply influential in the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and has been such a profound theologian as it relates to the Black experience in America, but also a rich spirituality. And why is it that for people who are suffering and going through difficult times, what is it about Christian faith that so draws people who are oppressed and marginalized? That theologian from the late 19th century, the early 20th century, his name is Howard Thurman. Howard Thurman was well known for his work called Jesus and the Disinherited. And again, he was someone that had informed so much of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s thinking. And he actually wrote a book, and in one of the many books and essays that he wrote this book called, Deep River. Yes, it's called Deep River, The Negro Spiritual Speaks of Life and Death. And what he actually traces is in the history of the Black experience in America, especially from a generation that was not that far removed from slavery and that actually predates kind of the Civil Rights Act, Howard Thurman kind of reflects on the Black experience, especially the Black experience that would cling to faith in the midst of being enslaved, oppressed, and wondering what was on the other side. Now, the reason why he writes, and the title is called Deep River, he actually reflects on a poem from Langston Hughes. The river was often kind of this, not only this literal place, but it was also this figurative kind of thing about when black spirituals would be sung, when people who had been enslaved and that were longing for freedom, they would often be singing about the river and going beyond the river. And what was life like in liberation? Now, one of the things, if you were to actually read and listen to some of these black spirituals that were sung, one of the most incredible things is how joyful and hopeful they can be. Like, here are people who have experienced the underside of society, wondering when and if liberation will ever come. And so Howard Thurman, he actually reflects in this book. And here are some of the things that he says. He says, what are these songs trying to say? Especially when they're leaning into joy and celebration for a people who are enslaved. He says, they express the profound conviction that God was not done with them, that God was not done with life. The consciousness that God had not exhausted his resources, or better still, that the vicissitudes of life could not exhaust God's resources. In other words, for a people who have been marginalized, all they could do was sing and cling to this joyful, hopeful remembrance of a God who was still with them and for them. This is the miracle of their achievement, and he's talking about the writers of these spirituals, of this music that would consistently sing of a God of deliverance and hope and joy and celebration in the midst of slavery. And he says, this is the miracle of their achievement, causing them to take their place alongside the great creative religious thinkers of the human race. They made a worthless life, the life of chattel property, a mere thing, a body that is actually worth living. What a gift. To be able to, even in the worst of circumstances, be someone who's clinging and trying to live into gratitude and celebration. And that's what faith offers us. Faith offers us an opportunity to be a people that can remember and to lean in, as hard as it might be, to lean into what are the things that I'm grateful for and celebrating today. What's the new song that God has put into my heart? So that in the midst of whatever ups and downs I might go through, I can cling to a God who is not done yet and who's got all the resources in the world. And though things might look hopeless, though I might be going through my own valley, what does it look like for me, even in the midst of the valley, to be a person who leans into gratitude and celebration? This event that's coming up next weekend, the Vibe collection concert, or it's not a collection concert, sorry. We are collecting donations. But it's a concert where some local artists, we're going to be celebrating so that we can serve and support an organization, St. Paul's House. It's an opportunity to not only hear great music of people within our community and outside of our community, and of course the great Taylor Fagans is putting it all together, but it's an opportunity for us to lean into how the arts and the creative experience can be ways in which the arts can actually echo this discipline of celebration, of leaning into a hope that comes and can be expressed through the arts. Robert Emmons, kind of a forerunner in the positive psychology movement. See, it's not only kind of the religious writers who talk about this. Look at what Robert Emmons writes. He says, sharing gratitude and celebrating blessings increases well-being, not just for oneself, but for those around you. I mean, isn't it true? The more grateful I am, the more I'm leaning into, even though whatever I'm going through, the more that I can lean into gratitude and celebration, it does have this multiplying effect. It has this way of inviting others to a life of remembering all that is good and beautiful in life today. So here's what I would love to do. I would love to, one of the disciplines that we talk about practicing regularly, whether it's a daily office, which is pausing throughout the day, or practicing a weekly Sabbath, which is a day to stop, rest, to delight, and to contemplate. And two of the questions that we've often introduced to use during either the daily office or the Sabbath, but this is a daily discipline of mine, And I do this because again, I have a personality that can sometimes lean melancholy. Look at me, I'm wearing a Jets hat, guys. Like I need to be reminded of celebration and to lean into God's goodness and just being reminded of the ways in which God has moved. And it's really asking these two questions. And here are the two questions. Who are you grateful for today and why? And the second question is, what are you grateful for today and why? Who are you grateful for today and why? And what are you grateful for today and why? And so every day it's a discipline for me because, again, I can easily lean towards melancholy. Now, again, there's also the question of what do I need to confess and what am I sad about today? Those are also questions that I ask every single day during my times during the day where I'm pausing. But the first thing that I'm trying to lean into is who am I grateful for and why? And what am I grateful for and why? So I'm just going to give you a moment. Why don't you reflect for yourself? Who are you grateful for and why? Thank you. And what are you grateful for and why? Thank you. Wanda's all over this, guys. Just for a moment. Okay, now here's what I'd love for you to do. I'd love for you to turn to your neighbor or get into groups of 2 to 3. And why don't you just share the answer to these questions? Now, I recognize some of you, like super introverted, you're like, I just came to church to listen to music and to hear someone talk, or just to have someone watch my kids. Like, I don't know why you came, and you're probably like, I don't know if I want to do this, but here, I would love to invite you to do this. If you prefer not to do it, you can just say to the person next to you, I don't want to talk to you. That's all right. That's okay. I'm grateful, but I just don't want to talk to you right now. All right. So why don't you go ahead, turn to your neighbor, get into groups of 2 to 3, and why don't you just share what are you grateful for and why? All right. Go ahead and do that. If you're here with your spouse, feel free to do it with your spouse. All right. Okay, you got 1 more minute, everyone. 1 more minute. 1 more minute. 10 seconds, everyone, 10 seconds. All right. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Hey, can you turn to the person you were talking to? Can you say thank you for sharing? Can you do that real quick? And then can you also look to that person and say thank you for listening? Can you do that real quick? Hey, hey, I would love, at the risk of being super awkward here, would just love to hear anyone. You can just shout it out. Who are you grateful for and why? And if you could just keep it brief. Who are you grateful for and why? You can just say a name or a person. They could be in this room. They don't have to be in this room. Who are you grateful for and why? Anyone care to share?
Grateful for this church.
Grateful for this church. Thank you, Delisa. Glad to have you. Thank you. Anyone else? Who are you grateful for and why? Oh, you're grateful for me? Oh, wow. Thank you. Anyone else grateful for me? No, I'm just kidding. Thank you. Yeah. Anyone else? Who are you grateful for and why? Yeah. Did I get a hand back there? Yes. Yeshua is salvation. God saves. Amen. Anyone else? Who are you grateful for and why? Anyone? Oh, basketball. Maybe. You know what? I think it's possible by Jeff. Give it up for Jeff Trong, everyone. Like, wow. Danny, you tied in what you're grateful for and who you're grateful for. That was well done. And basketball. And by the way, anyone that wants to play basketball afterwards. Yeah. Anyone else? Who are you grateful for and why?
Didn't say this, but I'm grateful for, I've been mindful of lately the pillars of faith in my life, who are my spiritual fathers and mothers, and
Yeah.
who,
Yeah.
showed me what that relationship should look like.
Yes. Delisa said basically pillars of faith who have been kind of forerunners and mentors and who have shown the way as it relates to faith. Anyone else? Who are you grateful for and why? Now, some of you are like, how long is this going to go? Well, I don't know. Anyone else? Who are you grateful for and why? Yeah.
Yeah, in a similar vein, I'm grateful for my support system around me, just like with a always changing, life in terms of work and all the issues of that I can deal with. I'm grateful for my family, my partner, Lena, my spiritual mentors, and everyone who can speak into my life.
Yeah. That's great. Peter's talking about just having a support system in the midst of all the ups and downs you're grateful for. Thank you, Peter. Thank you. Anyone else? Who are you grateful for and why? Yes. Yeah, your family, especially your kids who teach you who you are. Thank you.